The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead. We provide programs and services designed to assist and support the older town residents who wish to remain in their homes as they age. If we don't currently provide a service, we will try and connect you to that service. Call 311 or 869-6311 to get more information or receive services.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Welcome to Senior Talk Radio here on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. This is Project Independence and You. I'm your host, John Ryan, and my co-host today is Otto Lose.
Good morning,
John. Good morning, Otto. Otto has been with us. I was just saying it before we got on the air. Otto has been with us through the entire pandemic, and it's wonderful because he's always there to help Project Independence, and we appreciate everything Otto does. Otto is also going to be very, very involved in today's program because we are so fortunate to have with us today Robert Zimmerman. Robert Zimmerman is the principal and a founder of ZE Creative Communications, which is a public relations firm in Great Neck, and he's also a National Democratic Committeeman. And any question that I ever have in reference to politics, government, what's really going on in the world, you go to Robert for the question because you're going to get an honest answer and a well thought out. I mean, he really is that person that is so involved in the political scene and locally that just having him on this program is an honor to North Hempstead, an honor to Project Independence. Good morning, Robert.
I'm now blushing and getting bright red on Zoom here. It's not just the lighting, but thank you, John. It is first such a privilege for me to be with you and Otto Loesch and for the work you're doing, not only with this broadcast, but the work you do for Project Independence. And as someone who started my activism as a member of the Town of North Hempstead Youth Commission, and now that I'm 66, learning about Project Independence, which looks more and more appealing to me, I have to say, to you, Otto Loesch, thank you. You have been a leader for Project Independence and really just a great pioneer in that world and a great colleague of John's on this broadcast. And to Christina and Dan, thank you so much for all you do in bringing us all together so we can have these moments and talk about issues. It's really much appreciated.
Before we get into today, you did mention, North Hempstead and you go back years. How did you, we can talk about the Creative Communication, which is just a wonderful, wonderful firm that I would highly recommend to anybody. But today we want to talk a little bit with an election around the corner. We want to touch a little bit more on how the government works and potential craziness that can be going on here. But you just said you were 66, so I'm not giving your age out. When did you get involved and how did you get involved?
I think the times I grew up in, coming of age in the late 70s and early 80s, was a very empowering time and a time where you felt your voice was heard. You could stand up to protest the Vietnam War and have an impact. You could protest the corruption of the Nixon period during Watergate, stand up for civil rights and the environmental movement was just sort of giving birth at that point, just beginning, was just in its inception. So it was a very empowering time, and one of my first political activities was serving on the Town of North Hempstead Youth Commission, where voter registration for 18-year-olds, my first vote was at 18, was a very important mission, and environmental awareness in the town was very important. And I'll tell you, John, under our supervisor, Judy Bosworth, those very principles of environmental activism, standing up for social justice and against hate crimes and bigotry, for her leadership and Not in Our Town campaign, standing up the way she has for bipartisanship. You hear a lot of people talking about being bipartisan. You hear a lot of people talking about bringing people together. And a lot of it's just rhetoric and press releases because the consultants tell them it works. But in North Hempstead under Judy Bosworth, that's how government works every day. And she proves how important it is. There aren't a lot of victories we see in Washington for sure. But in North Hempstead and local government, that's where we have our victories. And we're seeing that in terms of the type of town we live in, our parks, our environmental safety measures, the principles Judy Bosworth articulates in terms of standing up to unite our town in very divided times. And the leadership certainly she's shown in the pandemic. Those are the victories that we can all take pride in being part of under her tenure as supervisor.
I totally agree with you, Robert. And actually, just to throw in a little cute story here, I wasn't involved with the radio when Judy first took office, and Otto interviewed her.
Really?
And the way I got the story was Otto was a little aggressive. Now she only wants Otto. Now she only wants Otto to interview her.
Well,
So
what
it
happened?
goes.
What really happened was there was an email sent out about what we should ask Judy, and I had a little bit of a problem with that in the sense that I thought we were just going to have a conversation, and I wasn't really being dictated to as to what I was supposed to say. So I kind of came on with a chip on my shoulder because I thought that I was being told what to say. But it turned out after 1 minute with Judy, that was far from the case. It was
Right.
very nice, great, open conversation. And I agree completely with Robert. We are so fortunate to have Judy Bosworth in the town of North Hempstead that people have no idea. If we had more of that on a national level, we'd be a hell of a lot better
Absolutely.
than we are right now. I can tell you that.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
You just gave a little bit of a segue, Otto, because I do want to spend a lot of time on the national. And Otto, you have questions in reference to voting and everything else. Actually, you know what? I'm switching gears. Otto, let's start with your questions in reference to a basic one about the Electoral College.
Well, okay, voting, I mean, clearly voting is like at an all-time high, and everybody is pretty peaked up about who they're for. Either you're for or you're not for, one way or the other. And, you know, everybody should by now know all about early voting and whatnot, which I guess we will touch on. My biggest thing is the Electoral College always seems to be, when it comes down to the nitty gritty, we get down to the Electoral College. And I often think if there's going to be any fraud or any hanky pank, that's the place where it could be. I was just wondering what your opinion was in that area.
First, let me just say, Otto, in terms of early voting or voting by absentee ballot, for anybody who's watching and listening who's not engaged or informed, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone, call town hall, call your county legislator. We have a board of elections that really does work very hard to be responsive, to be accessible. And so please don't miss your opportunity to count your vote. We all focus on the presidential, but let's remember, you're also voting for Congress, state assembly, state senator, a lot of other offices on the ballot you've got to be mindful of. So I hope that you all, anyone who's listening or watching has any questions, don't hesitate. Pick up the phone, call 311 in the town, call your county legislator. It's really easy and accessible, and they're there for you to help. Now, as far as your question out about the Electoral College, you know, people don't realize this, and it's a really important point you're bringing up, because when we vote for president, we're not voting for the individual candidate, of course. We're voting for the electors pledged to that candidate. This was devised, of course, by the founding fathers because it was a compromise between those in the organizing institution in the Continental Congress that wanted to, in fact, give the right to the ruling class, if you will, have people choose, and those who wanted a more popular direct vote. So the compromise was that people would vote for the electors. Now, electors are not automatically required to support the person they're elected to represent. For example, if I go in the voting booth and I vote for the electors pledged to Joe Biden. If you look at the ballot, you'll see electors pledged to Joe Biden or electors pledged to Donald Trump. You vote for those electors. In many parts of the country, those electors are not obligated to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So if you vote for Joe Biden's electors and your state votes for Joe Biden, your electors don't have the obligation in many states to vote for Joe Biden. They could vote for someone else. Occasionally there are stray electors. It happens sometimes, not too often. And in some states like Maine and Kansas, the electors vote according to congressional district, not based upon the overall state vote. For example, let's say New York State voted for Joe Biden, but the second congressional district voted for Donald Trump. In two states, Maine and Kansas, that elector from the second CD, which voted for Donald Trump, would vote for Donald Trump and not follow the will of the state, the overall populace of the state. So that's when you have divided electors. In New York State, it is the longstanding practice if you vote for Joe Biden, we vote as a state, and all the electors pledge to Joe Biden and support that candidate. But the reason I bring it up is the electors are not required to be chosen by the voters. The electors, according to the Constitution, are chosen by the state legislature. State legislators prefer that the people choose the electors when they vote for president. But let's say you have a state that has a voting dispute, or the election's so close that the state elector, that you can't determine who the winner is, or perhaps the state legislature wants to block the winner of the vote being chosen. State legislature can meet, they can determine who the electors are. Let's give an example, Pennsylvania. If it comes out where after the votes are counted and there are court battles disputing the votes, it's determined that the state legislature says, we can't choose who the winner is. They could then choose the electors. This almost happened in 2000 in the Gore versus Bush vote in Florida. In that case, it was a matter of about 500 votes or so, 400 votes separating Bush and Gore. Al Gore was, in his campaign, was arguing to have a recount go forward. There were various forms of a recount, but not a ballot by ballot recount. The Republicans said, absolutely not. There'd been enough recounting. They went to the Supreme Court, and there was a 5-4 ruling that said stop the counting of the ballots, and they gave the election to George Bush. The Republicans in the Florida legislature in 2000 were saying, if in fact Democrats persist in demanding a recount, we're just going to say this election is null and void, and the legislators in Florida were going to choose the electors to vote for George Bush. So it almost, your point about electoral mischief, if you will, or electoral corruption, to more to the point, almost happened in 2000 when when Florida's legislature almost decided to just ignore the vote and choose their own electors. But it raises a bigger point about the efforts to undermine our voting process and the urgency to protect it.
What's going to happen today on this show, and I'm not putting this burden on Robert, but as opposed to a back and forth, which we normally do, this is going to be really a lot more educational, because the wealth of the wealth of knowledge that Robert has and is willing to share with us, because what you just said now, I didn't even realize that in the 2000 situation in Florida.
I was there. I was there during the recount. I was in Nashville with the Gore camp. I was the New York State chair for Al Gore, and I was down in Nashville during that whole process.
Wow. You know, and it's amazing that the people sitting at home watching TV don't even realize what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak.
One correct. It's Nebraska that has divided electoral votes in Maine. I mentioned Kansas. I misspoke on that.
Okay, that's fine. We'll let you know, a few slips here and there. You know, we don't know what you're talking about anyway. We were just talking in reference to what happened in 2000 in Florida. And at the break, I just mentioned, which is the importance of the current administration making sure they have Amy on the court, his third pick for his during his term. Explain the importance of that now, which is it's a continuation of the same thing, but
well, that's the point. I mean, I think it's so important at this, when we talk about our democratic process, to rise above partisanship. I mean, people gave their lives defending our democracy and our constitutional system. My father risked his life in World War II defending our democracy. If ever there was a time to rise above partisanship and put the partisan talking points away and talk about the need to protect our democracy, now is that time. And the reason I stress that is because we have an incumbent president in Donald Trump who has publicly refused to support the peaceful transition of power. And he has gone out of his way for months now to undermine the democratic process. We all knew back in April and May when we saw the turnouts during the pandemic, the number of people using absentee ballots, the number of polling places that had to be closed for public health concerns. We all knew there'd be enormous reliance on absentee ballot voting in its different forms, and also there'd be a greater reliance on early voter turnout. And already we've seen in the early voting that's already taken place, already more than 50% of the entire 2016 election population has voted. So already at this stage, over 50% of everyone who voted in 2016 has turned out. That's a remarkable, unprecedented number. And every indication is we're going to have a record turnout, an unparalleled turnout in 2020. So I think we have now 79 million, I believe, have come out to vote. And that is over 50% of everyone who voted in 2016. So it tells you the extraordinarily strong turnout we have. And the reason I stress that is we saw these issues coming down. Many members of Congress fought to provide greater support for our postal service, to make sure there were more mail sorters in the post office. There are more mailboxes to deposit ballots. And Donald Trump very clearly said he was not supporting that. And he was very direct about it. He felt it would not help him. And so he did not stand up and support that. And our boards of elections are woefully underfunded. They're dealing with an unprecedented amount of absentee ballots they have to process. Now, in many states, many regions, like in Nassau County where we vote, if someone fills out an absentee ballot application incorrectly, it's mailed back to them. And they have a chance to make the correction. In many parts of the country, that's not the case. We have 8,000 separate voting boards of elections around our country, about 8,000. And the vulnerability they have to cybersecurity should greatly concern all of us. Just the fact that we're in Nassau County and our Board of Elections works better, and in Suffolk County you have a very reputable Board of Election too, doesn't change the fact that we're really all in this together as a country. So if one part of our country is disenfranchised, we all are. So the failure of this Congress, and I really hold Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump accountable, because they had many proposals come before them to increase cybersecurity, improve our election infrastructure, so there were paper ballots to match the electronic machine as backup. And every step of the way they didn't. And perhaps the most egregious action that I've seen from the Trump administration is their failure to recognize and appreciate Russia's deliberate strategy to attack our democracy. And it's not my opinion, or Democrats. When you have Donald Trump's top advisors, Dan Coats, the director of national intelligence, his FBI director, who stepped up, Christopher Wray, Admiral Rogers in charge of cybersecurity, all testified under oath that all their analyses show, these are Donald Trump appointees, they all testified under oath that Russia deliberately was attacking our democracy for the purpose of helping Donald Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton. Now that's tragic history, but now we're dealing with today. And the failure of the Trump administration to take this seriously has just empowered Russia more. And in fact has given Iran, we now find, also engaging in attacking our democracy, and of course China. So we have to really as a country come together to make sure we can stand up to the kind of corruption and attacks on our democratic system that we're facing. We're not getting that under this president, and that should concern everyone, Democrat or Republican.
You know, one thing that you're saying, Robert, and I feel it so much, and I think the young people, and I hope the young people feel it, even though they're new to the game, so to speak, is the tremendous divide that exists. You know, you can have a disagreement. Everybody disagrees with somebody at some point, but you're still friends. You still work together. You still try to do things collectively.
Absolutely.
That doesn't exist. This is black and white, and there's nothing in the middle.
You know, it's interesting. We're going to see on election day how divided our country is. It's quite shocking if you look at the polling that's going on and taking place, that you've got states like Georgia, Texas, of course, Florida and Ohio as toss-up states. Certainly many of them are solid Republican states, or states that Republicans have been winning consistently. Texas has been a strong Republican state, Georgia as well. Florida and Ohio always leaning Republican. But there may be a coming together. And I think, you know, it's funny. Bridging that divide is critical. But ultimately, that divide is only bridged when the people speak up and demand it. You know, there's an old expression, before you see the light, sometimes you got to feel the heat. And I think you saw that in the midterm election when the country came together, and an unprecedented victory for Democrats in the House of Representatives. It was the largest midterm victory in the history of past century, where you saw this massive sweep to put the Democrats in control of the House. And it was based upon issues like healthcare, protecting pre-existing conditions, and also protecting healthcare benefits under the Affordable Care Act. And the failure of the Republicans to present an alternative, I think, has really been a continual liability for them in this election as well. So in terms of bridging the divide, we'll see if this election makes a difference in that regard. We'll see if people come together, because I mentioned this before. It's important to separate yourself from the Democratic and Republican rhetoric. I looked at what Donald Trump's top advisors have said, how they've spoken up. General Mattis, who was Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, publicly said that Donald Trump was a threat to the Constitution and was dividing our country. Of course, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was very publicly critical of President Trump in ways I can't repeat on the air. Certainly, General McMaster, the Director of National Security, and of course, General Kelly, who was the Chief of Staff to President Trump, felt he was thoroughly unqualified for the position and attacked him for the way he mocked the soldiers who lost in battle. So I think if you look at President Trump's own top advisors and what they have said about his conduct, I think it shows you the issues we're facing in this election are not Democrat or Republican. It's about preserving our democracy and protecting our Constitution. Don't take my word for it. Listen to General Mattis. Listen to General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary of State Tillerson, Dan Coates, Director of National Intelligence. They were there when it happened. They were in the room where it happened, and they are, of course, the best sources.
The ability to separate fact from fiction nowadays. The man you keep addressing keeps talking about fake news, and he creates a pretty good chunk of it himself. But the bottom line, it's very difficult for the normal, everyday person to understand that a lot of the stuff that's coming from the other side is fake. Also, they make up a lot of stuff.
It's so true. And the Pew Research Center did a survey, and they came up with the fact that Americans have never had more information coming at them, but they're absorbing and reading less of it because there's so much coming in at once from so many different types of sources, from LinkedIn, from Facebook, from Twitter, from our conventional, traditional news channels, from online blogging. So, and the Pew Research Center, one of the most reputable research centers in the country, came back with a stunningly definitive analysis about the fact that we're all sort of shutting down from the overload of information coming at us. But here's the good news, Otto, to your point. We've never had an easier time to fact check information. It is so simple on your phone, on your iPad. Call a friend and just put in fact check your question. And you'll see the Washington Post fact checker, the Associated Press fact checker, the CNN fact checker, this Fox News fact checker. They all, PolitiFact. PolitiFact won the Pulitzer Prize for fact checking. It's become a cottage industry under this administration. And so there's no excuse for anyone not to have the facts. And it's critical that you do. We know that science counts. We know that wearing a mask protects you to a great degree from contracting COVID. We know that social distancing works. When President Trump says that 85% of the people that wear masks still get it, that's just false. And it's so, and frankly, we need to know facts because our lives depend on it. The health of our loved ones depend on it. So, Otto, to your point, I get why people are frustrated. We've never had easier access to facts. And if ever there was a time facts matter, they do now.
I think throwing something interesting in here, my wife, who is really not a political person, she goes along with stuff and, the last 2 months, specifically because of COVID, we're not really going out that much, et cetera, et cetera. She puts on the news at night and she's sitting next to me on the couch. He's lying. He's lying. She's just yelling at the TV. I'm saying, oh, please turn it off. What happened to you? I've never seen it like this in my life.
First of all, Stephanie's one of the smartest political observers I know. One of the smartest observers, period, in life that I know. I always follow her lead, John.
I know, she's smart. I'll agree with you. Yeah.
No question. But you know something? Better than yelling at the TV, call your friends and fact check with them. Make sure you got a plan to vote. And I understand the frustration of yelling at. I go on TV because it avoids yelling at TV. But I understand the frustration people feel. Part of the problem is we watch news we watch news not to educate ourselves. We watch news to reinforce our points of view. And I think that's a real mistake, and I think that's a growing trend. We watch news to feel good. I watch news to see what I'm going to learn that's new, what I don't know already. I read newspapers to see what I don't know already. So I think that's an important trend. We have to move in that direction.
You know, one of the things, I'm sorry, again.
No, you go, Otto.
Human nature, perception is reality, all right? And there are people who have a perception of what they think is reality that you can't understand. You just don't get it. Like, you know, it's so far away from reality. And unfortunately, that's a problem because you can't change people's perception in many cases. I think you have to hope that you get enough people to get the right perception of what is reality. But there's a lot of people that just don't get it. I mean, you know, reality is to them, John is not John. John is, you know, Kareem Jabbar playing basketball.
He is to me.
Perception.
You know what? But it's amazing how that's two people in my life that have become so impacted just because of what Otto was talking about. People are not even accepting reality. And then when you see something so blatant that you just want to shake your head and say, that's not real. How do you believe that? And yet you have people, you know, you see it on Facebook saying stuff and talking about things that it's like, what planet do you live on?
You know,
but they do.
You know, it's interesting. I find if you take the personalities away and just talk facts, you can build bridges with not everybody, but with a lot of folks. Because anyone who's got a grandchild with asthma or allergies, they're worried about the environment. They're worried about the air these children breathe or the water they drink. They're worried about whether they're going to be living next to a landfill or a sewer that's not treated. And so if you look at something like that, they're going to support environmental regulation. They're going to support environmental protections. So something as basic as that. And I think certainly amongst our viewers today, but I think most folks respect the idea who are listening to us and watching that science does matter. Doctors do count in terms of treating this pandemic. And yes, you've got folks out there who don't want to accept that and want masks to be a political message, but it's up to us to reinforce the point based upon what the scientists and doctors say, that they're not just saving their own lives, they're protecting their families around them. They're protecting law enforcement on the street they pass. They're protecting them from contracting this virus. So facts do still count. If we can take the political personalities away and talk about the issues, I think people will find a way to come together.
Right, I'm agreeing with you there. And especially, you know, to talk very specifically right now about COVID, it doesn't hurt to wear a mask. I mean, it's the most amazing thing because the numbers are starting to spike again.
Sure.
People who, you know, they're out and about without a mask or without social distancing. And the point is why? Guess what? It's not nice being at home all the time. It's not nice, this social distancing, not seeing your kids and your grandkids or whatever it's going to be. But you don't want this to go on forever.
You know something,
there will
John?
be a vaccine. Go ahead, Robert.
John, I know no one likes to be at home all the time. And I know what the burden is as a business owner myself for 33 years. We're working remotely. I understand the challenges we face. But I'll tell you, you talk to an Iraqi war, or Vietnam War, or Korean War veteran, talk to a World War II veteran, look at the sacrifices they made for our country. Our sacrifices are not as severe, relatively minimal. And in fact, if we don't make these adjustments, if we don't wear masks, we know what, we don't practice social distancing, don't wear masks, we're prolonging this pandemic. We're putting everyone at risk. And so I think and you look at the record spikes taking place in states that are not practicing proper social distancing and not practicing wearing mask wearing. You see record high spikes. New York has got a bit of an increase, Long Island does, but you can see under Governor Cuomo, County Executive Laura Curran and Supervisor Judy Bosworth, and certainly County Executive Steve Ballone, we're safer communities because we are, in fact, respecting what the doctors are telling us and being safer.
And it's very important. Actually, Balone, Steve Balone, I don't mean just call him Balone, Suffolk County executive, he was on, I think it was yesterday, the day before, with two huge major outbreaks of COVID. I think one was from a wedding and one was from a party, but I think it totaled 50 or 60 people that, and fines are going to be levied.
That's right.
And rightfully so. And that's not taking away one's freedom. You know, you look at this like, oh, you're taking away my freedom. That's not a freedom. You're taking away my right to exist by not doing the proper thing. I should be able to go to the supermarket if we all wear a mask. That's not a civil liberty taken from you. That's just being kind. I look at it. You know, that's my opinion. But I mean, here now Steve was on.
And just to go full circle, look at how. And this is really an important heads up, I think. The fact that we have a president who is not respecting science or the doctors, is putting out misleading information repeatedly to the public, mocking people who wear masks, saying people get sick with masks anyway, holding events where there's no social distancing and minimal mask wearing. You look at the kind of super spreader events he's creating, you see not just the threat he's creating to his own supporters who come out for him, and they have their right to rally for him, but look at the threat he's creating for them. But look at the harm he's causing our democratic process. And in many respects, the fact that he is, in fact, underfunding our post office at this critical time, he's not providing proper support for our election process, is in fact really putting at risk the right of people to vote. But it's not, and this is important, it's not because there's a grand conspiracy out there, as he claims, that voting by mail is a fraud. His own FBI director, Christopher Wray, said there's no organized effort to defraud people voting by mail. Bill Evanina, who's the director of Homeland Security, Election Security, said there's no evidence that voting by mail is being manipulated by foreign powers. People have to understand their vote counts. And it's so critical to vote and participate. And if they do, their vote will be counted. What I worry about in some parts of our country where the vote's going to be election, where the vote in the election is going to be close, will Donald Trump try to use this dishonest narrative about absentee ballots and voting by mail as a way of undermining the will of the people and trying to, what he can't win in the ballot box, win in the courts.
Robert, could I ask
That's very interesting.
the background,
Otto.
like a little bit of a nitty-gritty question here. I've been voting for like 65 years, and I remember the paper with the strips, and you signed every year, and somebody had to take those pieces of paper and calculate them and do whatever. I'm just trying to visualize what takes place now, and as I see it, and maybe you could stop me, every county has a board of elections that has a database of voters who are registered, as I understand it. So if you do a mail-in or an early vote, or you vote on election day, those will be marked off as having voted, and that database is collected in, let's use Nassau County or Broward County in Florida or wherever. And all of these counties ultimately have to send their summary to some central point where it's consolidated. Is that kind of fact of life here? Because I think if that is understood by people, then there is a way to keep track of your vote and the fact that you've voted or you're not allowed to vote or whatever. What is the flow that really takes place?
Constitutionally, each state is allowed to run their own elections, if you will, and manage their own electoral process. So it varies, unfortunately, sometimes from state to state. Some states at one point didn't allow provisional ballots. For example, Otto, if you were to go vote and your name wasn't on the rolls for some reason, then what in fact would happen is you'd be given a ballot to fill out, and the courts would adjudicate whether you were legally allowed to vote. Some states didn't have that procedure. Florida didn't have it in 2000. A lot of votes were lost for that reason. So they have provisional ballots. But when you go to vote, let's say you vote by absentee ballot, your name, your name is checked off when your ballot is mailed in. Let's say you get 2 ballots mailed to you at home. Well, obviously, if you send both back in, one's going to be ripped up, and you'll probably go to jail. for voting twice if it was done in deliberate violation of the law. But so there are different checks and balances in the system, but every region of the country is different. It is not unusual. I mean, the president talks about we may not know the results for weeks. Well, I still can't find that part of the Constitution where it says we have to know by midnight on election night or the day before on the networks or the day after on the networks. It doesn't work that way. The goal is not to get the votes counted fast, it's to get the votes counted accurately and completely. And there are many situations where it takes weeks or a month. In House races, Senate races, and of course we've had delays for president too that have gone on for in the Gore v. Bush for a month. So when you go to vote, the important point is making sure that if you're voting by absentee ballot, if you show up in the voting booth, if you vote early voting, you're signing off, you're checking off the fact that you voted. You're providing documentation when you go to vote that you voted, whether it's by mail or in person. And that then is acknowledged on the voter rolls. And then it's compiled in each region of the county, and then it's recorded statewide. So there's ample documentation in many parts of the country, though, and this is why protecting our democracy is so critical, providing an infrastructure to support our election process is so critical. Because in many parts of the country, there aren't paper ballots to back up the machine ballots. What does that mean? That means that, let's say you vote on a machine, there's no paper ballot to back it up to document that was the way you wanted to vote. So you can't check to see if that was an accurate recording of your vote or not. In New York State, when we vote on paper and put it through a machine, so there's documentation. Many parts of the country don't have that, and that is a real liability. And of course, as I mentioned before, you've got 8,000 different voting facilities, voting organizations, county boards, town boards, and the like, and they're all very vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. So we really have to make a commitment, not to play politics with our election process, but to put our democracy above politics and protect it. That has not happened under this president.
Early voting, Robert, I think it ends on Saturday. Am I right?
I believe so.
I think it's Saturday. But here in North Hempstead, I voted yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever, in Roslyn. But it really is. It's a smooth operation. They're working. You had mentioned the Board of Election. They're working crazy hours because I was talking to them. You know, they leave there at like 6 o'clock whenever the polls close. They got to wrap up the stuff and take it to headquarters. Then they're there the following morning at 4:30 in the morning to get all the equipment, bring it back. Everything is set up every day because you can't leave it there overnight. It makes sense because if somebody got in to hack something, that the hours they put in. But, you know, I'm curious what's going to actually happen on election day. With all these people coming out now, election day could be nothing. It'll all be happening already.
That is something we should really focus in on because, and maybe a very good way to wrap up the show. I think we're due for a break because I think that issue of what election day foretells for us and how we guarantee the votes are recorded is critical.
We are just having the most energizing conversation with Robert Zimmerman, who is a Democratic National Committeeman and brings to us and is willing to share with us all the knowledge that he has attained over the years of doing this. And the question,
let me just say, it's energizing, but I'm between Otto and John. You're like the Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper on New Year's Eve. The two of you are so energizing. You keep it moving fast.
It's amazing when it moves, it moves. But actually, and I'm going to throw a Christina accolade out here, a compliment. Since pandemic, and I'm not saying before it wasn't moving, but during the corona, it has been wonderful. I mean, the guests that are coming on, and one thing is very serious. And I know, Robert, you're always available, but Zoom has made it easier. So people, I say, you know, I got to drive in from Manhattan. It's an hour to get there, an hour to get home. They're not going to go for it. I can call you up 5 minutes before and you're on your Zoom. And it really has helped us out.
Much of the TV that I do now, in fact, all of it is really by Zoom or by Skype or that type of thing. And and they call you at 6 a.m. Are you available at 7? You know, you have to really, but it makes it a lot easier.
100%, it really is. And I'm fooling around. I was talking to somebody before I came on today. You get dressed in 1, 2, 3, no matter what you know, like even in you, they call you last minute, no matter what you're doing in the house, you put on a sports shirt. If you have to put on a tie, you put on a tie. You sit down and you do your interview for a half
For the
hour.
record, I'm wearing pants. Okay. Just for the record.
I didn't want to go there, Robert. But since you're sharing, I'm not. No, I'm kidding. At the break, we were talking about the numbers that are coming in so far, voting wise. Dan, the producer, offered a number of 70 some odd million, which is amazing.
Amazing.
And you had said it earlier, Robert. What do you think that is then going to be doing for the actual election day this year? That nobody will be coming out because everybody will be finished, or we're going to have wonderful, wonderful, huge numbers?
I think we're on our way to a record unprecedented turnout. I think you're going to see, certainly true, people who would normally vote on election day chose to vote by early voting. People like myself who normally go to the polls on election day and love that experience, I voted by absentee ballot because of COVID. My dad, who's 98, who loves to, I remember my first experience, he took me to the voting booth and I pressed the lever for Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater. It stays in my, I was just an infant, but it stayed in my mind. It was such a visual, exciting moment. And he voted by absentee ballot for the first time in his life for safety for COVID. So you have many traditional voters voting in other ways, but I think what we're leading up to, though, is a record turnout. We may not have as busy an election day as normal, but I think when all is said and done and the numbers are counted, you're going to have a record turnout, and I think galvanized and mobilized by young people, new voters, and I think a really unparalleled vote amongst communities that have felt disenfranchised, like the Black and brown communities. So I think it's going to be an exciting election night.
What about seniors?
Well, it's interesting about.
Do you think the seniors are going to be like we talked about Florida a little bit earlier in the show? Do you see a lot of seniors switching? I mean, especially when you're talking healthcare, when you're talking Social Security, you're talking some of the things that are being discussed in this administration. It's definitely impacting seniors in my mind. I mean, I don't understand any doubt in the seniors' mind.
Just to your point, John, just to your point, and I know everyone says the polls are always wrong. Well, the polls were wrong by a few percent in 2016. And as a rule of thumb, as a guide for people who are watching, I assume if Joe Biden is not winning a state by over 5%, he'll probably lose it. So I look at these close states and I don't know that I'm not assuming he's going to win them. Remember, polls are not predictors, they're indicators of where you are. And so if you look at what is called the hidden Trump vote, that is not often recorded, or the margin of error, I think Joe Biden's got to be above 5% comfortably to feel he's going to win a state. And right now he's running comfortably ahead in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And even though Arizona's tied up, he's still doing well there. Pennsylvania, Florida's a toss-up, Texas is a toss-up, Georgia's a toss-up, and North Carolina. And if you doubt me, just watch where the candidates are going. The fact that Donald Trump felt he had to go to Nebraska, which should be an automatic state for him, or go to Georgia, which should be a guarantee, or North Carolina, he's seeing the same polling we are, which shows he's in trouble in these safe Republican states. Which brings me to your question about seniors. In every poll that's been produced consistently now for a month, you look at polls over time, not at one moment, over a time period. Even the Fox News to CNN and Wall Street Journal, MSNBC, NBC polls, you're seeing he is hurting badly amongst senior citizens. He may win them, but his numbers are down dramatically from what was a reliable Republican vote and a big vote for him. In fact, in Florida, Biden's beating him. And I think some of it's driven by their concern about Donald Trump acknowledging that he lied to the American people about the pandemic when he did in the Bob Woodward tapes. And fact check that if you're listening to me, where he just said he did not disclose the facts of it and did not disclose how dangerous it was when he was informed of it. And he told Woodward that on tape. The fact that he has in court and very publicly said he wants to abolish the Affordable Care Act, which means abolishing pre-existing condition coverage. According to the Pew Center, 45% of American households have at least one person living there with a pre-existing condition, asthma, diabetes, a form of cancer, heart condition, whatever it may be. And the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans, it's all of them together, have not produced an alternative. How are they going to protect pre-existing condition coverage? What is their alternative to the Affordable Care Act? They've shown nothing, zero. I think has undermined him dramatically with senior citizens. So in that respect, I think you're seeing a very significant pickup for Joe Biden. and a very significant respect for what I see as the normalcy, the balance he's representing, the fact that he's speaking to mainstream values. So I think for Joe Biden, this is a real significant voting block you've honed in on. I think they'll stand with him on Election Day.
Good.
Point is, though, making sure our votes are counted after Election Day.
You just mentioned, I'm sorry again, John.
Go, Otto, you go.
In preparing for this show, I Googled how to register to vote. And that's what I Googled. And I ended up with a thing, Democracy Works. And on that, and for New York State, I was able to check my registration status, that I was valid. And also, there's a thing there where you can check your ballot status, which I found interesting. If people are concerned about their vote or whether they are registered to vote, they can go on that site in New York State and find that out. And I think that's very valuable. It should give you kind of a feeling of security that they actually do know that you're registered to vote and that they do know where your ballot is and what the status is.
My concern, though, Otto?
It was called, I just went on Google, said how to register to vote, and I ended up on Democracy Works. And on that, which was connected with New York State, were these choices that were lookups that you could make. There were other things like, if you wanted to request an absentee ballot or whatever, which is a little too late for that, but but I found those two things very, very interesting. The fact that some actually confirm before Election Day, before they get into trouble and not be able to vote, make sure that they are registered to vote and that they don't have a problem when the voting time comes.
By the way, I have to say to both of you, that's so important. I hope people take advantage of it. But my greatest worry is making sure the votes are counted after Election Day. Now, in every election, there are court challenges about whether the absentee ballot was filled out correctly, whether the votes tabulated correctly. That's part of our democracy. It takes place, and that's the territory, and that's as it should be. And if there are challenges, they go to court. But we're seeing a different legal strategy pursued, an unprecedented one, where we're seeing Donald Trump and the Republicans trying to already going to court to block access to absentee ballots, try to limit when they can be counted. In other words, they can be postmarked by Election Day, but maybe because of the mail system, they arrive after Election Day. And the Trump and the Republican National Committee and Trump are trying to block that vote from being counted. And what worries me, we have to keep on our guard and keep talking to our members of Congress. When the president goes to the Supreme Court, which is, he said this in the debate, he's going to go to the Supreme Court and try to disqualify many legal absentee ballots that are being cast in the battleground states to try to win this election in the courts, because he won't win the election on the ballot box. And we have to make sure, if we're going to preserve our democracy and preserve our Constitution, that every vote is counted and to make sure that the voices of the voters are heard in this election.
Totally in agreement there. It's just, and I do have one quick question because we're going to be running out of time. For argument's sake, just say it's 60 to 40. Robert, on election night with votes that have come in, via the polls, do they still count the mail-ins, or if it's not necessary?
Always, because when you're voting by mail-in, you're not just voting for president, you're voting for Congress, senator in some states, assembly, all range of local offices. So you have to count every ballot.
Okay, I'm just thinking.
And we've got to make sure every ballot is counted. That's the challenge. No, what's so concerning to me is seeing the president try to use his new pick for the Supreme Court, now Justice Barrett, to be his proxy to, in fact, deprive the voters from being counted, and staging really in many ways a judicial coup by blocking our constitutional process from being exercised. So that's what we have to keep a close eye on. And what we have to make sure of is that everyone who is listening, I guarantee you each one of you got a friend who hasn't filled out their absentee ballot yet, or hasn't made a plan to vote yet, or you've got a relative or a grandchild who hasn't voted yet. Get on the phone. I don't care what party you're in. Get on the phone, go call them, Zoom, Skype with them, make sure they come out to vote, because our democracy only survives by your participation. Our Constitution only survives by your participation. So much has been sacrificed to give us this opportunity. And if we don't treasure it, we don't hold it dear, we'll lose it. So please, if you're listening, if you've already voted, great. But guarantee you, trust me on this, if you've got a member of your family or a friend who hasn't voted yet, make sure they vote.
And the real significance of that, and Robert's going to be able to confirm it more than I, is all the little things that are happening in Washington, the sign-ons that we don't even pay attention to. I sent you something the other day in reference to the civil unions that are being broken up in Washington. Yesterday, I read that Trump signed on with 32 other countries an anti-abortion pact. Now, the countries were Sudan and countries, you've heard of them, but we as a nation signed on for anti-abortion with 32 countries in the world. And it was announced yesterday, a little blurb that I didn't even know something like this even existed. No major country. You didn't get anybody in Europe signing on, but he's got 32 other people. That all these little subtle things that are going undetected.
What this president has done by executive order.
That's it.
Which has violated the rights of women, their legal and health rights. What he's done to violate the rights and the freedoms of the members of the LGBTQ community, our fellow citizens, and blocking their rights to adopt children. What he's done to disqualify so many environmental safeguards that we've held dear to protect our water and our air. What he's done, in fact, to compromise the right of workers and labor unions. We all have to be mindful of that. And the notion that we can just sort of talk it out and we can sort of bring him together and work it through with him is a fraud.
Right.
He has no interest in finding common ground. He has no interest in seeing the light. So we've got to make sure that his party feels the heat. And we've got to make sure that then, when the American people speak clearly and strongly, a lot of these politicians will sit on the fence and try to duck the issues or call themselves problem solvers when they're really just trying to just protect themselves. We got to make sure that those folks who aren't prepared to stand up, when they see our votes, they'll stand up. And when they see, and that's really what it's about. By standing up with our voice and our vote, we're going to force our government to stand up for us as well.
A perfect way to end it. Robert, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and so does Otto and Christina for coming on today. This was phenomenal.
I'm thrilled to be with the Anderson Cooper and the Andy Cohen of Town of North Hempstead Broadcasting Media. You guys are energizing and empowering. And Christina, to you and Dan, thank you so much for the work you do putting this broadcast together. I just am so proud to be part of it.
But that's our show for today. I think it's been a tremendous, and Christina has her lovely outfit on. I want to wish everybody a safe, happy Halloween. Don't go crazy. Be safe whatever you do. Wear your mask, and with your children, go out. Just know what you're doing. You've been listening to Senior Talk Radio here on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We'll be back next week, everyone.